welcome to the Raleigh City Council's Growth and Natural Resources Committee meeting. We have just one item to go over today. I do expect that we may go past 5 o'clock, so just a heads up. We've got a good presentation. A few folks signed up, I think, for public comment. So we'll first hear from staff, ask any questions from our council members, kick it over to public comment, and then bring it back to the table. So I will kick it over to Tansy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tansy Hayward, one of the assistant city managers. Megan Anderson is our office manager of our Office of Sustainability, and so she'll be presenting an update on the work that the city has been doing on the Community Climate Action Plan. So the City Council, just before its holiday break, got an update on the status of that plan, and there was a previous request that the committee talk in a little greater detail than the update that was provided at that time. So Megan will take you through a presentation to give a little bit of the context about the plan, but we'll spend most of her time driving into a bit more detail than the high level update that you got previously.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tansy. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for referring this. With that, I'm going to start my presentation for everybody. Is everybody seeing that? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. Well, with that, I'll get going. Thank you again for having me. Good to see everybody here today. So just as a reminder, I'm here today to address the council request from the January 5th meeting to learn a little bit more about where we are on the Community Climate Action Plan. And so with that, you'll be hearing me and you'll see a lot the word CCAP on the screen. That is what we call it for short, because I'll be saying it a lot. So just get ready for that. All right. All right. So as we get started, I wanted to give a quick shout out and thank you. I like to call our team small but mighty. The Office of Sustainability was created back in 2009. We've been working on climate related projects, which includes equity and resilience projects ever since. In addition, we staff the Environmental Advisory Board. So on the slide, you'll see Cindy Holmes, Greg Sponsler, and Nicole Goddard. And I wanted to give the team a special shout out and thank them for their hard work in support of this presentation and our climate work. In addition, City Council has long provided guidance and support for this work, and you'll hear that referenced throughout the presentation today, so thank you for that. We also have some really stellar partners across the organization and community. I often say we're only as good as our partners, and we truly do have so many wonderful leaders and supporters that help us lift up this work. As we jump in today, I wanted to share the opening paragraph from our introduction to the CCAP plan to provide you with a bit of visioning that I think drives home the importance of all of us working together as partners. So climate change is perhaps the single most important environmental, economic, and social issue facing humankind today. The role of our community and other communities across the world play in addressing climate change is critical. Climate action requires the collective action of everyone globally, individuals, governments, private businesses, and nonprofit community. The City of Raleigh recognizes the important role of local government in community climate action and has prepared this Community Climate Action Plan, which begins to address the challenges that climate change presents to our region. The role of government, while important, is small in comparison to the actions that everyone must take. With that, I'll jump into the agenda for today. So for the agenda, first we'll provide you with a brief climate background. Since I've already provided several updates, this will be very brief. Next, I'll introduce our three main objectives that make up the vision for climate action in the plan. For each of these three objectives, I'll give a brief update on how this was incorporated into the development of the CCAP and also give you an overview of the vision and approach for each objective. Attached to the agenda materials for today's meeting, there was a draft list of the strategies and actions in CCAP from the last manager's update. And I'll talk about them briefly on the next slide, but I'm not going to spend time today going over those individually. Rather, I'll dive into talking about the implementation of strategies, where we'll spend the bulk of our time today. And here I'll show you where we are prioritizing actions. And I'll provide several example actions that support CCAP strategies, which will help set the foundation for addressing future impact. Lastly, I'll provide some information on next steps and invite council to give us feedback or ask any questions. So as you can see, the city has been engaging in climate work for almost 15 years. This slide just shares a few highlights over the years. Raleigh first signed the U.S. Climate Mayors Protection Agreement in 2007, and we've been partnering with city departments a lot of work throughout the years in support of climate. In the past few years, there has been a lot of work to work collaboratively in the community, and in 2019, when the City Council set the community-wide greenhouse gas goal, that gave us a great direction to guide the development of the community-wide climate action plan. So as council is aware, there are many governing documents that guide our work in the city. Over the years, we've worked with our partner departments to embed sustainability principles into overarching plans like the comprehensive plan and strategic plan, as well as departmental business plans and more specific plans to address areas such as the fuel and fleet transformation and transportation electrification. Given the extensive depth and breadth of climate action, these are other guiding plans play the role of targeting specific best practices and actions in support of the climate plan. Over the past year, the CCAP strategies were developed, and we have embedded those CCAP strategies into other departmental work and into our governing documents. This includes the new strategic plan and the 2030 comprehensive plan updates. The strategy categories in CCAP were designed to align with where we'd like to see high impact. High impact to address deep cuts to greenhouse gas emissions, which means prioritizing energy use in buildings and transportation, and high impact in addressing both resilience and equity, which are both cross-cutting measures. As we prioritize implementation, we are thinking of high impact in several outcomes and also in identifying high impact partners that can help us reach the right people to make the most impact happen. So we are focused on our short-term strategies list which includes actions designed to be started or implemented within the first 7 years. There's also long-term strategies that give us the community a roadmap to follow as we think about where we need to go through 2050. And of course, we want the CCAP plan to be a living document. In fact, it already is. Although the plan is still being finalized, we've already started working on actions, building foundational steps and partnerships, and embedding CCAP strategy areas into the community and city processes in various ways to address climate change. All right. So there are 3 main objectives that are embedded into our climate action work: supporting equitable development, building community resilience, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This presentation, as mentioned, will largely focus on greenhouse gas impact. But when we think about equity and resilience, these will largely relate to the how we will implement CCAP strategies and actions. With that in mind, I'm first going to briefly describe the vision for both resilience and equity and how it was incorporated into the development of the climate plan. Then I'll spend time talking about how the CCAP plan focuses on greenhouse gas impact potential. So first is the vision and approach for equitable development objective for our CCAP plan. The equity approach to CCAP occurred in phases throughout the development of the plan. The phases generally align with the creation of the climate equity definition, the consideration of equity as strategies were developed, and finally, the evaluation of CCAP strategies through the equity impact matrix exercise. I'll show you more about what will appear in the CCAP plan related to the deliverables of each of these phases. So here's the definition for climate equity. This definition helped create the vision for equity as we developed the CCAP plan. This definition was created with our equity advisors and informed by best practices from other cities. It was then adopted and used by all of our CCAP community stakeholder teams as we developed the plan. Climate equity involves addressing responsibilities for greenhouse gas emissions, meaning looking in particularly at our biggest generators and contributors. It involves recognizing the disproportionate distribution of climate change burdens and climate impacts that create vulnerabilities, meaning those community members that are often most affected by climate change are often those that are contributing the least to greenhouse gas emissions. It involves addressing the just distribution of the benefits of climate protection efforts, meaning we should be prioritizing equitable outcomes for everyone in the community, so every person in Raleigh can experience positive social, environmental, economic, and health outcomes. And lastly, as we look to implement CCAP actions, the how we implement is the key to addressing equity. So we need to look at our implementation of climate strategies through the systems that make up our society, such as government, health, transportation, and economics, the conditions that perpetuate existing inequities in those systems, and the effects of climate change on the people of Raleigh, considering and prioritizing those people that are likely to be the most negatively affected. I'll also note that we created this climate equity definition before the city had an equity approach or program, and since then we've been working very closely with Dr. Caesar and her team to align climate equity and environmental justice into the equity approach for the city. So this is a quick look at the equity impact matrix that I just mentioned. This matrix will appear in the final CCAP document. The input from the stakeholders was used to help inform the considerations for equity and how we as a community can move forward in implementing CCAP strategies in an equitable way. In the matrix, the CCAP strategies appear across the top, and then down the left side are the equity impacts. These impacts are grouped into topics that address equity in the categories of environment, economic development and jobs, and public health. As you can see in this picture, some strategies will have a positive impact, some have the potential to be adverse, and others may be adverse. To create the matrix, we hosted group discussions with community stakeholders, subject area experts, and equity advisors to evaluate the equity impacts of the strategies. This exercise was designed to provide an understanding of the potential impacts. These results provide us with a starting point to understand equity in the context of climate change and our CCAP actions. However, these should not be interpreted as our final determination, as we anticipate a lot more community outreach as we and the community implement strategies. This matrix provides the city and community stakeholders with a bit of a roadmap that will help us prioritize actions based on need, and it will also help us start to identify which actions may need more thoughtful consideration and input from stakeholders in order to ensure that actions are implemented in ways that won't negatively impact the community. When we get to the implementation of strategies in the presentation, I'll share some examples and considerations that highlight information from the equity impact matrix. So next we have the vision of building community resilience. For the development of the CCAP, we built on and incorporated several projects and plans into our approach. We thought about how we implement strategies with resilience in mind, as well as where we can have the greatest impact to mitigate climate change impacts and vulnerabilities for our infrastructure and neighborhoods. The Triangle Regional Resilience Assessment was completed in 2018. We partnered with several neighboring communities, cities and counties across the Triangle, and the National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center out of UNC Asheville. They helped us identify our community threats and community assets and what our climate and non-climate stressors are in our region. This work helped us understand and determine the climate change and growth impacts to the Triangle. This assessment has helped inform a resilience approach and priorities for several projects and programs in the city and the community over the past few years, and it also informed the resilience approach for the development of the CCAP. In addition, we have partnered with the Office of Emergency Management, Wake County, and our neighboring jurisdictions on the latest update to the hazard mitigation plan. By participating in this process and bringing the lens of climate change and resilience, this has opened up the opportunity to potentially be eligible for FEMA and other project funding in the future that could support CCAP implementation strategies to build community resilience. We've also incorporated the 4th National Climate Assessment, including the information on the stressors and trends in the Southeast, which helped inform the CCAP resilience approach and priority areas for action. So now I'll briefly share some information about the vision for resilience that is included in the CCAP plan. Historical data on climate in the Southeast US shows that we are experiencing more frequent, longer lasting heat waves, more frequent heavy rains and storms, more frequent warm nights, and because of the effects of ocean warming, we are experiencing hurricanes with stronger winds and heavier rains. All of these impacts are taking place in the context of rapid population growth for the Triangle region. Higher population means more development and infrastructure, more impervious surfaces, and more people in need of protection from storms, floods, and extreme heat. The physical changes to our environment caused by climate change will require us to put in place infrastructure, policy, and programs to protect our community. Our economy will also be affected by these physical changes and by our efforts to mitigate them. The infrastructure and technology required to make this transition across the economy will be expensive, and it will take many years of coordinated planning and collaboration. At the same time, our community will need to adapt to an already changing climate and recover from more frequent natural disasters. In relation to climate equity, these impacts will affect some people in our community more than others and create compound adverse outcomes. So we need to prioritize actions that will mitigate these risks and that will hopefully also create other co-benefits for these groups. Later in this presentation, I'll be providing examples of resilience considerations that will help us prioritize actions in the CCAP. And now we'll be spending most of our time today talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So as you know, we have seen our community emissions go up. Community-wide, our emissions went up by 2% from 2007 to 2014. Considering our population increased by 16% in that same time period, this shows that we've been doing a relatively good job. However, this slide helps illustrate what happens if we do nothing. And as you can see in this business as usual forecast model, we need to make deep emissions cuts in order to combat climate change. This greenhouse gas forecast model was provided by our consultants as a business as usual projection to give us a baseline for taking action related to our 80% reduction by 2050 goal. It shows what could happen if we don't take any action and emissions continue to rise. The dotted line is the goal the City Council set for us at 80% reduction by 2050. The blue is the buildings and energy greenhouse gas emissions, which is 55% of Raleigh's emissions. In that 55%, 28% is commercial buildings in Raleigh and 23% is residential. The yellow is transportation-related emissions, and these are also significant at 42% of total emissions, and the majority of these emissions come from single-occupancy vehicles. There's also an almost undetectable green line at the bottom of this model, and that represents both waste-related emissions and City of Raleigh-related emissions. So as Council may remember from past updates, it's important to note that waste makes up 1% of community emissions. So although it's important to continue to focus on waste reduction and waste-related strategies, we most definitely included them in CCAP actions. These actions may not have as high of an impact on our overall greenhouse gas reductions like the energy and transportation. Lastly, with all of our local government operations, we make up just 2% of the Raleigh's community emissions. And that being said, there are still plenty of opportunities for the city to improve and play a lead role. However, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in city operations is also not going to have as high of an impact as focusing on community-wide strategies related to energy and transportation. So I'll talk later in the presentation about the city versus community role in implementing the plan and in relation to impact and prioritizing action. So overall, what this slide is showing us is that Raleigh's emissions would rise from 5.5 million tons of CO2 in 2014 to over 9 million tons in 2050 if we took no action to reduce emissions. So on the next slide, I'll show you where we have the greatest opportunities to focus on these emissions reductions. So in the CCAP plan, the modeling that our consultants did shows economies of scale relative to our overall emissions. We use the greenhouse gas model to help us prioritize emissions reductions, impact potential, guided the design of the CCAP strategies and actions in the plan. Not surprising, by far the largest opportunities for greenhouse gas impact include the transition to a cleaner energy mix delivered by our electric utility, which will result in a 50% reduction in emissions by 2050. That work that Duke is projected to do to green the grid and meet their carbon reduction goals is a large part of this transition. While the grid is becoming cleaner, we, the city and the Raleigh community, can take a lead role to reduce emissions through supporting the transition of the transportation system across Raleigh to electric. You can see that the combination of those together results in a very significant reduction in emissions by 2050. In support of that high impact potential, the city completed a comprehensive transportation electrification study, and we are already working to implement this, which I'll talk more about later. I also wanted to mention, when we think about strategies for greening the grid and transportation electrification, although these are high impact, there are still reduction measures that are really important and have the potential for high impact. although they are a little bit more complicated to achieve. So for a green grid, we will be working to promote the transition to renewables and solar. However, reducing energy usage through energy efficiency measures is a very important step because, of course, the cleanest kilowatt hour of electricity is the one you never used. For transportation-related emissions, while we need to transition electric, we also want to get people out of their cars and have people make fewer and shorter trips to continue to reduce vehicle miles traveled. These types of actions can be more complex to achieve because they involve individual decision-making and behavior change. But as Council is well aware, there are continued efforts to identify ways to create the highest impact in these areas. So now we'll talk a little bit more, and I'll give information about the implementation of strategies and actions. So to get started, as I mentioned, the greenhouse gas impact of city operations may only be 2% of the total emissions, but there are still so many ways the city can have a great impact in influencing and guiding change in the community. And the CCAP plan will be framing up the city's role as well as the role of the community. So I wanted to briefly share this with Council. Some of these I'll talk about in the next steps at the end of the presentation as well. So to get started, the city will continue to lead by example, as it's important for us to practice what we preach. And there are so many ways that the city can help signal a shift or a change. Considering that many cities outside of North Carolina may have more levers to pull when it comes to regulating or requiring an action by the community, it will continue to be important for the city to explore opportunities where we can lead by example and to understand where we do have the ability to regulate and shift practices through policies, plans, or codes, or by creating incentives or disincentives. There are also many ways that the city can serve as a convener, collaborator, and educator, and there will be numerous opportunities to empower the community through that outreach and partnership. It's also important for us to signal through how we are spending our time and resources, especially with the current budget and resource constraints that a lot of us are feeling. There's an opportunity for the city to think creatively and lift up opportunities to invest in projects and programs that set the tone and lay the foundation for institutional and community-wide shifts in processes and culture. So now to the community and collaborators role. So while the city can do quite a bit to lead the way, climate action at the community-wide level is what is needed to reach our goals and have meaningful impact. We hope to have participation in CCAP plan from all members of the community in various ways. It's going to take all of us to bring about this real change. So a couple of examples of how they can play a role includes participating in strategy-specific working groups. Since CCAP actions are organized around having high impact, there will be several initiatives that continue to form around implementing actions. Community partners will need to serve as implementers and also as leaders for action. We'll also need targeted input and guidance. Sharing input will also include providing updates on actions that community actors are taking, as well as providing us with tracking and performance metrics. The Raleigh community is also chock full of creative and innovative minds and entrepreneurs. This will be so important as we navigate opportunities and barriers. We'll be looking to those innovators to suggest, start, and support new ideas and projects that will help Raleigh achieve our climate goals. There are so many ways that the community will be able to support the CCAP implementation, and taking action will look very different for individuals, organizations, businesses, and nonprofits. And we need all those different actors in the community to engage with the CCAP actions and find a role in action that fits for them. So now I wanted to share a few strategy considerations that you'll find in the CCAP plan. These support the draft CCAP strategies you received in your backup materials by providing specific considerations for high impact in the objective areas of greenhouse gas reduction, equity, and resilience. After I provide a few examples of these considerations for high impact, we'll then dive into examples of the specific CCAP actions. So a few examples that you'll find in the plan include building energy efficiency, which is one of our greatest opportunities for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and it's the most important for us to do early and soon during plan implementation to reduce consumption while overall energy transitions to a greener grid are taking place. Energy efficiency best practices are most impactful in existing non-residential buildings due to the need for fewer interactions and the opportunity for more direct and high impact with those building owners. For energy supply and renewables, Duke Energy has established the goal to reduce CO2 emissions by at least 50% by 2030 and to achieve net zero by 2050. The greening of the grid and the incorporation of more renewables will greatly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In the action section, we'll talk a bit about how we're exploring options for renewable energy. As mentioned, transportation electrification is one of the largest opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The transportation electrification study that we completed provides those action steps to help us support this transition. While we were working on this study, I was actually astounded to learn that by 2040, over 55% of new vehicles are expected to be electric. That is going to require a big shift in our communities. This study focuses not only on that transition to electric vehicles, but most importantly on all the energy and technology infrastructure that will be required to support this transition. And lastly, transportation, reducing vehicle miles traveled is also very important for greenhouse gas reductions. These are a few examples of resilience considerations related to the strategies that you received. For energy efficiency, we should focus on improving the maintenance of safe and comfortable indoor temperatures for building occupants. Improved building envelopes that also have the benefit of residents being able to stay in their homes longer in the case of power loss in an emergency or in extreme temperatures is a good resiliency strategy. Diversifying sources of energy will ensure energy resilience and a more consistent energy supply. Diversity in energy supply can improve resilience to multiple hazards such as flooding, high winds, or extreme temperatures. As we get started on CCAP, we should look to identify projects for renewable energy that may be more vulnerable to climate stressors, or that in the incorporation of renewables would make the community more resilient. This might look like incorporating renewable energy into the infrastructure as we transition to electric vehicles, buses, and equipment. For efficient land use, in more dense development patterns, people can more easily meet their physical needs and social needs. They have the ease of access to food and healthcare, and also a greater opportunity to connect with other community members. As urban expansion continues, the infrastructure to support this density requires increasing amounts of impervious surface and fewer trees to increase sensitivity to flooding and extreme heat. We can mitigate these risks by identifying suitable locations for more dense development, which takes into account climate and non-climate stressors. We can also make locations more resilient by incorporating green space and other cooling strategies to mitigate flooding and heat. So a few examples that you'll find in the CCAP plan that will help us with how we prioritize equity include energy efficiency. It will be more important to consider energy burden and who can benefit the most from other co-benefits of energy efficiency, like improving the comfort of heating and cooling in the home, and health benefits like air quality. Over time, for energy supply and renewables, the transition of the energy supply will require Duke to invest in more technologies. This will open up new employment opportunities. These jobs will offer good paying opportunities in renewable energy installation, maintenance, and development. For transportation electrification, there are many ways that we can be more inclusive with our future planning. Traditionally, some folks have been left out of the EV market. So as we plan, it will be important to focus on strategies that create opportunities for these groups and that also find ways to lift up the infrastructure and access to EVs so that as we see this rapid transition to electric vehicles, places like multifamily housing and have the infrastructure to provide this to their residents. There are also many co-benefits of electric vehicles like improving localized air quality that we want to make sure that everyone in Raleigh benefits from. For vehicle miles traveled reduction and alternative mobility, reducing traffic delays and idle times for passenger or freight vehicles will increase the travel efficiency, particularly to small businesses with regard to faster and more reliable access to goods. Equity considerations can also be built into planning processes to not only determine where sidewalks or bicycle infrastructure are lacking, but also where they can best serve historically underserved populations in the city. Expansion of bus routes will provide greater services across the city, decrease transit times, and allow access to expanded economic and educational opportunities for underserved populations. So on the next slides, I'll share some examples of how we are turning these considerations into actions. So as you'll see on the next few slides, we have already started working on actions that are in various stages of implementation. I'll be sharing examples of actions that we're working on for all the three categories. And here's a quick reference for you to follow along with. Look for these symbols next to each example action. The idea actions are those that we would like to explore, identify partners, or evaluate resources to get started, but we may not currently have all or some of those important logistics identified just yet. The getting started actions are those where we have had more conversations with the impacted stakeholders and there is buy-in for this idea to be explored for potential implementation. The actions underway are those that we're working with partners on, and we are in some stage of implementation already. So here we go. So you'll find these and many other actions listed in the CCAP plan as examples of ways that the city or the community can start taking actions on strategies. I'm not going to touch on every example on these slides, but I'll touch on a few to share some of the connections to high impact. So in relation to buildings and energy for CCAP strategies, we're working on an idea for a Raleigh Climate Business Leaders program that will include an online toolkit of resources. Considering that business and commercial buildings industry is one of the largest opportunities to impact change, we're going to focus efforts and resources and create a coalition of Raleigh businesses who are setting sustainability goals related to their energy, transportation, water, waste, and stormwater opportunities. We'll build on existing relationships and programs with departments and also work through the business alliances throughout the city. We also recently created an interdepartmental City of Raleigh Sustainable Facilities Committee that will report back up to the GNR core leadership team. This committee will work on best practice sustainability and energy efficiency practices and our LEED Silver building policy related to how our many City Raleigh facilities are performing. While there are already weatherization programs currently, there is opportunity to work with partners to provide assistance and get more Raleigh residents off of waiting lists. These measures provide many benefits in improving energy efficiency, comfort, health outcomes, etc. We would like to be ready to take advantage of future opportunities that allow us to support community partners in this work. So a few more for energy and buildings. We're working with our partners like the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association and Duke Energy to identify opportunities to explore expansion of renewable energy. We're continuing to evaluate the new renewable energy programs that were recently released by Duke Energy to expand solar. We also helped to found the Duke Energy's Climate Cities Initiative, where Duke is collaborating with North Carolina cities to work together on solutions to help us reach our shared climate goals. We're currently evaluating the design of a Green Source Advantage program that would better cater to the needs of governments to participate. And there's a current GSA program that we have started to learn more about as well. We've also discussed opportunities such as evaluating the renewable and solar potential for other city facilities, like the future electric bus charging facility, the future development of Wilders Grove landfill, and on expanding solar at Raleigh water facilities. So as mentioned, transportation electrification is a high impact strategy area for greenhouse gas equity and resilience. We have several initiatives underway that support the strategies in transportation and land use. Those actions address both public and private EV availability. Some examples include, we are partnering with Advanced Energy to create an EV-ready playbook to guide anyone in Raleigh on all they need to know for installing EV infrastructure, related to anything from code requirements, ADA accessibility, maximizing space, cost, how to make a case to your organization and why it's important, etc. We have reached out to our partner cities across North Carolina so that we can design this guide so it's useful and promotes the expansion of EV infrastructure across the region. Although we are designing it so it's more widely accessible across North Carolina, it will have specific requirements and information for our local Raleigh community. Council can be proud that we have been leading the way across North Carolina cities in providing support for transportation electrification best practices. Another I'll mention is for our own fleet. So sustainability is partnering with engineering services on an EV facility analysis that will help us better understand EV loads for the correct placement of future EVs in our fleet. We're also evaluating budget changes to transform the current vehicle and equipment replacement funding model from gas-powered to electric. As mentioned previously, we're working to create a sustainable business toolkit and the Raleigh Climate Business Leaders Program. And this program will benefit multiple climate goals and, very importantly, will create another opportunity for Raleigh businesses to focus on reducing vehicle miles traveled. Businesses will be able to gain resources and assistance to create strategies to get both their employees and their customers out of their cars. In addition, the bioenergy project with Raleigh Water that will capture the methane gas from the wastewater process and then reuse it as fuel for our Raleigh transit buses. This project was actually a moonshot when we first identified it in our climate energy action plan years ago. And so we're really happy to be building on that success to create the connection with the bus system. This is a very innovative project that we'll continue to promote as a best practice and other cities are interested in. We've also worked with planning and development, and they have started including carbon emissions analysis in city rezoning, area plans, and other planning studies and decisions. This responds both to the city's goal for significantly reducing carbon emissions by 2050 and to a specific policy embedded in the comprehensive plan. This analysis considers the effects of a plan or zoning change on per capita emissions. So in relation to our resilience and cross-cutting CCAP strategies, here are a few examples of actions. Council recently got an update about our Ready Raleigh Guide, which is a manual to connect Raleigh community to resources about emergencies and natural disasters. And it helps inform potential hazards that may face our community. This guide is directly related to building community resilience, not only through emergency preparedness and preparing to bounce back better, but also by strengthening the social fabric of neighborhoods. This gives the city departments and community partners a very tangible tool to interact and build relationships with community members. And it also gives departments a way to build trust with neighborhoods and share important information back and forth. This will also be rolled out with economic development in the business community as an outreach tool. And we recently updated the guide in Spanish so that the Hispanic and Latino initiatives team in housing and neighborhoods have also created engaging materials to explain how to use the guide and promote its use in the Spanish-speaking community. We've also partnered with the Partnership Raleigh program in housing and neighborhoods to roll out the first cohort of climate action youth interns. This program is possible through a Bank of America grant, and we'll be hosting 7 interns in the first cohort who will have mentors from staff representing departments throughout the city. The interns will work on climate-related projects that promote climate justice, equity and environmental justice, and resilience. They will also learn from outside climate and sustainability experts, and we have some environmental special guests that I'm pretty excited about. We're also working on an urban heat island mapping grant in partnership with the North Carolina Climate Office, the City of Raleigh, Durham County, Museum of Life and Science in Durham, the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh, Activate Good, who does volunteer work, and several other community partners. This project will engage local volunteers to map heat island data in Raleigh and Durham and layer that with social vulnerability to map extreme heat events and to highlight those that are most vulnerable to the impacts of this extreme heat. We were just notified that we've been chosen to move forward with the next steps for this grant yesterday, and we're looking forward to implementing actions to mitigate heat with this data. Yesterday was also a big news day for us as we were also notified that we've moved to the next steps for a leadership and community resilience grant with the National League of Cities in partnership with Partners for Environmental Justice. The city is working closely with Partners for Environmental Justice on several programs, including the Raleigh Youth Leadership Academy and the Raleigh Watershed Learning Network. A partnership with PEJ is impactful to build a foundation for addressing environmental justice, resilience, climate impacts, and empowering residents to help us identify solutions that work in the community. This includes an important focus on youth who have an important voice in addressing climate change. The grant with PEJ would expand the Watershed Learning Network program, and whether we get the grant or not, we'll continue working closely with Partners for Environmental Justice. We're also partnering with several departments to create resources for the community to help guide residents on how they can navigate the land use codes and other needs in order to host a community garden on private property. This is currently allowed, but difficult for interested parties to navigate. City departments also collaborated to create criteria that we use to prioritize open space and the preservation of natural lands. This criteria include priorities for resiliency and equity when we are evaluating the acquisition of open space. Another opportunity that is cross-cutting and addresses resilience, innovation, transportation, electrification includes a grant application that we partnered with Transportation Parking on to get several solar-powered mobile EV stations. These could be placed at different locations throughout the city to pilot the suitability of installing future permanent EV stations. Parking also wanted to use them in park and ride lots so that we could provide charging locations where a dedicated electric line wasn't available and it might be temporary. Lastly, these create opportunities to address resilience, as these mobile solar stations can be daisy chained together and used to power emergency management stations so that during an emergency or natural disaster, crews can set up in various locations. Unfortunately, the grants had to be paused due to the impacts of COVID-19, and the parking fund also saw a very large hit due to the pandemic. This equipment is pretty expensive without a grant, so we will be keeping this idea top of mind if and when other funding or grants become available. In the future, we're also looking towards an organics recycling program. The Solid Waste Services Department is currently working to create several efficiencies to the existing yard waste collection program. These efficiencies also support our climate action plan, and we look forward to evaluating the addition of food waste in the future. So resources always present a challenge, and this year is not an exception. We have identified a number of potential sources of funding for climate projects, but the resources needed for transformative change to reduce community emissions will be high. We've been working to embed sustainability and climate action into existing funding and grants from the city. One example includes partnering with economic development to use the Sustainability Fund in partnership with the Building Upfit Grant, so that businesses that identify energy efficiency related measures that go above and beyond the standard practices can get some funding. We've also partnered with Housing and Neighborhoods on their neighborhood improvement grants to fund community group initiatives for green space, pollinator habitat, and other urban agriculture projects. We've retooled the Sustainability Fund to target city projects that would directly support CCAP strategies. And in addition, we're starting to work with specific implementation teams and budget and finance to explore ways to incorporate climate-related priorities in the CIP process. These projects include the Sustainable Facilities Committee and the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Study. The pandemic impacted budgets and staff resources, as well as those for our partners throughout the community. This combination of constrained financials and staff resources will present some challenges, but it may also bring some opportunities. So as council is aware, there's a lot of discussion at the state and federal level as the new leadership gets settled in. For example, the 4 pillars of the new White House administration's Build Back Better approach are climate, equity, economy, and COVID recovery. All of these could directly align with the CCAP plan. There may be funding and other climate opportunities coming from both the state and federal government, not only in a dedicated climate funding stream, but also embedded with all the different departments, agencies, and administrations, and in the economic and COVID relief packages. We want to be prepared and stay nimble so that when we evaluate, we'll be ready to participate. This would give us the opportunity to identify shovel-ready projects and even moonshot ideas that could really move forward the objectives and goals of CCAP. As council may be aware, the Sustainability Office managed a past $3.84 million block grant for energy efficiency projects. This was when President Biden was vice president. We may see opportunities like this again to lift up CCAP through similar funding streams. With this in mind, we will continue to identify project ideas and have conversations with partners, even if we don't currently have the funding available, so that we are ready to jump on an opportunity. This is also an opportunity for City Council to let us know if you have shovel-ready project ideas or know of partners that could help lead implementation. And even if you had a moonshot idea that we could pursue if the opportunity for funding was made available. All right, so to get us wrapped up here, we're working to finalize the CCAP plan, and here are a few of the next steps. In order to empower action, we'll be prioritizing education and outreach with our departments that have high impact projects and programs, and those departments that do a lot of outreach and have a lot of connections in the community. We'll also be identifying and working with community groups and partners that have high impact projects, programs, and outreach. This support was also highly requested in our CCAP stakeholder survey that we put out to the teams. So as we create resources, we'll be looking for ways to share them widely in the community. We're also working on our communication plan to roll out the CCAP on the web, social media, and other targeted outreach. And in addition, we'll be evaluating options to create the most efficient way for providing updates about CCAP for the community actions over time. We're also identifying possible data and performance metrics to track our progress and to begin sharing stories and case studies of community action. Our goal is to bring the final CCAP plan to City Council on March 2nd meeting. All right, with that, I am happy to take questions, and I will stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Anderson. That was great. Very thorough, very good, lots of information, and exactly why I wanted to bring this into committee, given that it was a lot to digest in a manager's update. So I'll open it up to council for questions. Do any of you have any? Mr. Knight?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Ms. Anderson, for providing this presentation to us. I think it's good, timely in a lot of ways. And I think one that you hit on a couple times during your presentation, that we do have a new federal administration. And I do think there are going to be opportunities, and I'm hoping that these opportunities will come quickly for Raleigh to be able to garner more resources, possibly financial and otherwise, to go about these tasks. As you know, I'm very interested in sort of scaling up energy reduction, and I do want us to continue to look at programs that are being used in other cities. Charlotte and Nashville, for example, have similar projects, but different, going forward with Duke Energy, and I think that's something that provides an opportunity for us in a big way. As we all know, with solar, in the long run, you profit, you make money that you otherwise would not through the traditional use of the current typical use of energy. So while there are obviously upfront costs to everything, I think the sooner we get going with those projects, the sooner we recoup those resources. And so I'm excited about looking forward and working on those projects as well. One, and I may have missed it, the Duke Energy Climate Cities Initiative. What is that? Tell me a little bit more about that, if you will. And I'm sorry if I missed that during your presentation.
Yeah, no, thank you. I only briefly mentioned it. So it started a couple years ago, and we had Duke Energy as one of our stakeholders during our CCAP development process, and worked pretty closely with them. And we were one of the founding groups that was working really closely with them, and to even help them set their goal. And after they set their goal, they were interested in collaborating with the cities around North Carolina that had already set climate goals as well, to talk about where our barriers, challenges, and opportunities were. And so we meet every so often, and we've always worked with Duke Energy, but this has given us a new way to kind of connect at different levels in the organization and make our priorities and kind of special kind of things. With local government, it's a little different than working with other partners. And so we've been able to kind of share some of those. And so one thing that we're looking at is, as you mentioned, there's other cities. So Charlotte was able to do a Green Source Advantage program, but it was pretty difficult, and they were kind of the first ones. So that was awesome. And we were learning from them. We're also talking with them, for example, on how is there a way to make it more accessible to all the other cities as well. So that's just one thing that we've been looking at. So it gets kind of complex, and we're learning along the way as well, because there's a lot to be learned, that there's experts out there too. So we do a lot of that sharing. There's some other groups that are supporting us that kind of come in and kind of educate us a little bit on all these different things, and as Duke's rolling out. And so they're really trying to think of us more and get us a little bit more involved and ask some questions as they're rolling out programs, so we can kind of tell them what's feasible and what's not for us. So that's an ongoing conversation basically, and it's really helped us create those relationships within Duke to know who to call, because it's the same as the city, right? You're so big, you're not always sure who to talk to about what, and dig into some ideas that you can work through.
Right. Thank you. Madam Chair, if I could continue real quickly. Thank you. And also with our partner governments at the state level, I think this is an area that we need to continue to advocate for, dealing with climate change and sustainability with the League of Municipalities, with the Metro Mayors Coalition. But I think that should be our priority to making sure that this is being looked at very closely by our state legislature as well as the federal government. And back to the new administration, the Biden administration, I think he just signed an EO for that all new vehicles bought by the federal government had to be electric. I may be wrong on that, but I think that's something to look at. And I think that's something we need to be thinking about, to be looking at. And you mentioned EV, for city government about moving in the direction of, why not? Why are we not ready to have all new vehicles EV or as close to that as possible? I know certain vehicles may not even have that, certain trucks, et cetera. But I think it's something for us to be looking at very closely because, again, in the long run, it makes money for the city, and that's something we should be moving towards. So I think this is, arguably one of the most important things we're working on as a city. It encompasses all the things we've been talking about, our economy, equity, and so I'm looking forward to carrying on and continuing with this with the Office of Sustainability and the rest of the city government and the council. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would say well said, Councilor Knight. Let's go ahead and, go ahead, Mr. Cox.
Yeah, I was also curious about the relationship with Duke Energy. And I was wondering locally, because we're really focusing on reducing our emissions by 80%. How much of our electricity is nuclear, and how many, and what is the contribution of our electricity use towards greenhouse gases? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. That is a really good question. And they come out with plans that share that. And actually, I've recently looked at it, and I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I cannot tell you what that contribution is. But actually, as you mentioned it, there is a process that happens every few years called the Integrated Resource Plan. And that is something that we've been talking with Duke Energy and with our partner cities on. And basically, that talks about what kind of makeup Duke Energy's grid is and what their plan is for looking out about forecasting for that 15 years. And so we've actually been collaborating and talking about how we can make sure that Duke Energy and Utilities Commission is aware of what is going on in our climate goals and what we want to see. And so sometime here in the future, we're drafting some information, and that'll probably be coming to council here shortly to share more information about that, so we can make sure that they're aware of what we're doing. And I think what you're getting at is basically how do we shift away from coal or other, areas that we would like to move more towards electric and other cleaner sources. And so we are trying to pay attention to that in order to take care of that. And if you wanted more information, we could also follow up and share their sustainability plan that breaks all that down by how much is nuclear as well. It is a little high compared to some other places in North Carolina, which helps with the way that they define clean energy.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, to know, the carbon emissions that are caused by electricity usage today. Because if we don't know that, then we don't know, what our goal is. If we reduce that by 80%, how much of that's going to contribute to the reduction of 80%. The other thing I was wondering is with Duke Energy is anything being looked at in terms, I'm sure it is, but solar power. To me, it seems like we have enormous commercial buildings in the area in Raleigh, and very few have solar panels on their roofs. You can see that. I don't know how many Harris Teeters and Food Lions we have locally, and all those parking lots that could be generating electricity through solar power, and they're not. And I was wondering if there is any consideration to that.
I'm so glad am I on mute? Can you hear me? Okay.
No, you're fine.
Okay, I'm so glad you asked that. Actually, hot off the presses, we've just gotten a report from North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association to talk about renewable clean energy. And this is a new thing that they're offering to their members. And we were a guinea pig city to say we would love one. So we work with them on that. And it literally just came out, I think Friday, and I haven't got to read it yet, but it basically breaks down our renewables, which is, I think, don't quote me, 98%, something in the 90% solar, because that's what's most viable here in our area. And it breaks down what we have: commercial, residential, a little industrial. And so we're happy to share that with council so you can see what it looks like now. And knowing that is good. And we're actually talking, so that's very global, and North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association are kind of experts in being able to track that. It's not easy to do. And so we're working with them to figure out ways to learn even more and dig down in and understand a little bit better, more like a neighborhood level, what it looks like in Raleigh. So then we can figure out what that means and what we want to do. So that we're definitely looking at that, and happy to share that report so you can kind of get a view at that high level. And it also compares us to Charlotte. So you can see from Charlotte how we look comparatively.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Councillor Fort.
Sorry, one quick question. You mentioned the green jobs training and the pipeline with schools. Is that with like high school students or college students? And do you have any specific schools that you can identify?
I would love to talk more. We've talked quite a bit about this. We've had conversations with Wake Tech. The Economic Development Office has been a great resource for us to talk as well. And so there have been several discussions and good kind of connection points when they worked on something to be opportunistic, but to create something that's more formal. We don't have a plan on that right now, but that is one of those ideas that I would love to lift up more and create. And I think we've talked about it, like with the bug grant, we're trying to create pipelines through that program, and we're doing it where we can. But if there's ways to kind of think about that more globally, and that's one of those things that I'll just mention, when we had the block grant money before, was one of the green jobs training was a big initiative. So there are several examples and great partners out there, but if you've got ideas, that's an idea we'd love to lift up and talk more about. And in the CCAP plan, you'll see kind of some of the areas that we think, like, for example, as the transition happens with Duke Energy, that transition will mean lots of different kinds of jobs, and how do we trickle down the technologies and the training to get those jobs for our community. So one example of the industries, but economic development and some other partners have been great in those first discussions. So we look forward to any ideas you have as well.
Well, if I could pitch something real quick, I would love to see a partnership between Duke and the HBCUs in Raleigh. So Charles St. Aug and Duke could be connected in some way to do some type of green jobs training program. I think that would be excellent.
Yeah, we have some good connections with them too. I actually think I may have brought that up in my last meeting with one of the HBCUs. So yes, love that idea.
To piggyback, Megan, we might want to connect offline. There's a woman at Environmental Defense Fund who had been working on exactly that for quite some time. So I would love to connect those dots. Yeah, thank you, Stormy. All right, I would love to open it up for public comment if council members are okay with that. I think we have about a handful of folks. Mr. Smith is going to help us facilitate this part, and each speaker will get 3 minutes. So I will maybe work with Mr. Smith to keep time. I don't think we have a timer up. So Derek, can you help us?
Yes, I'll run a timer then, and I'll give you a heads up when it's time. First, we have Joe Bearden.
Howdy, y'all. Hope you can hear me.
Yep. We can. Hey, Joe.
Hey, how you doing, Nicole?
All right, good to hear you.
So I'm a city resident, retired now, but volunteering with 350 Triangle. And I want to thank the staff and everybody. I was part of these early CCAP meetings, and I just want to emphasize this should be a start for the city. This isn't an end. And on a couple of notes on the Duke stuff, net zero is not zero, which means when someone tells you they're net zero carbon, it means they're not zero carbon. And that's an important distinction. The Sierra Club did a study that was released yesterday grading Duke on their initiatives, and let's just say they didn't get a good grade, but you'll want to look at that. The IRP, which was referred to, only had one scenario that included renewables. So the IRP has way too much on natural gas. I think 7,800 megawatts of natural gas and only one renewable. So I would not wait for the IRP to help push Duke along. I would say as the city being a big customer, I'm sure you pay more to Duke than I do, that you push Duke as a customer saying you need to do better because right now they're not doing good enough. And I'll end by asking the city to have a greater sense of urgency. We're actually in a climate emergency. And this climate emergency needs to be a part of every decision the city makes. And I would say that we need a tighter and a more uncomfortable goal than what has been stated in this report. We need to challenge the city and challenge our residents to do much better than the goal that's in this report. And I think that's all I had, but thank you for listening.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, next we have Linda Watson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Megan, for the wonderful presentation and counselors for being here. I really support what Joe just said. This is a climate emergency and we need to act so quickly. Issue I have with the report and Raleigh's general strategy is that it focuses only on what we consume or produce, what we produce in the city of Raleigh limits. So we don't look at what's going on at the airport. As far as I know, we aren't tracking how much city employees or consultants fly, for example, so we can't reduce that and reduce our actual greenhouse gas emissions. More importantly, food is not mentioned. I was a member of the Raleigh Environmental Advisory Board for 2 years and brought up over and over again the importance of food in greenhouse gases. And according to Project Drawdown, that's in the top 4 items is the 4 most effective things we can do is to reduce food waste and to move to a plant-based diet. City of Raleigh could have a huge impact by leading by example at all of its meetings and events. There should be plant-based options available. I love the idea of the sustainable events guide. That should include having plant-based options there at every event. Raleigh used to host the Triangle Veg Fest, and that went to Durham because it got a better response in Durham. We could bring that here to help people understand how they can shift their diets to be more plant-rich, which would be healthier for them as well. And the Bull City Vegan Restaurant Challenge is another hugely successful event that encourages restaurants to include vegan options for a month. They have votes, they have prizes. It's a really fun event, and it's the sort of thing that Raleigh could use to remind people that one of the most important things they can do is to shift to a plant-based diet, but we never ever hear that in the Raleigh reports. So people think it's not important. Even though right now we're focusing on what we produce and not what we consume, let's make sure people are aware of how their choices can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Our next speaker is Patty Cervanka.
Thank you. I have no comment right now. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being with us, Patty. We appreciate it.
Okay, next we have Tim Niles. Tim, are you with us? Mr. Niles?
Derek, is Tim our last person? Maybe we can circle back to him if we have anybody else.
Yeah, it looks like the other speaker has left that we had, so Tim is our last speaker.
Mr. Niles, are you with us?
I can hear some clicking on some keys, and I'm getting something from this volume, but no other response, so sorry.
Well, I think we did what we could, and I'm sure he has all of our email addresses. So, Mr. Niles, if you're there, you got like 10 seconds. All right. Derek, thank you. I'm assuming that's it then.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. So we will close public comment and bring this item back to the table. If council members have any further comments or questions, there's no real action today. This was really more of an update and chance for us to kind of ask some in-depth questions, but y'all have anything else? Mr. Cox?
Yes, I agree. This is good information, and I agree that this is a start. And I think we should really formulate what we should be doing as next steps.
So Ms. Anderson laid out some next steps for us in the final slide of the presentation, which is a lot of work on the CCAPs and staff's continued roles. And then Councilmember Knight, you are really interested in prioritizing kind of, and I'm hearing Mr. Cox say this too, Councilmember Cox as well, talk about solar and us needing to look into that as a strategy. Obviously considering budget restraints this year, but like all fingers and toes crossed for funds coming down from the feds or other new creative funding measures. But I totally agree that this is not a beginning, this is not an end. We are on a process and it will continue to move with us. So I'm very much interested in keeping our foot on the alternative gas, not the fossil fuel type. But Mr. Cox, do you have anything specific that you think we need to do as well? Just kind of highlighting we need to keep moving.
Well, just to highlight that we need to keep moving if we were ever going to reach this goal.
No doubt.
I mean, and not just what, obviously we're the little green line at the bottom of the chart, and we need to be thinking more about what the community at large can do. And the question is, how do we get there? How do we get businesses to use solar, for example, and put solar panels up in their parking lots? How do we do that? And that would be a big question. Absolutely.
And actually, I have been quietly frustrated with how slow this process has been. But I'll say that right in this moment, as I'm thinking about who all is already at the table with the Climate Community Action Plan, it makes me feel really good about being able to have those stakeholders already at the table and addressing exactly what you're bringing up, that it is not just the city doing that little 3 to 4% of making a difference, but we have big stakeholders already at the table bought into this and working towards our plan collectively, or towards our goal collectively. So Megan, I would say take that as a, if you need us to step in and talk with some of those leaders in the business community and the community at large, that we're ready to be advocates and tell folks how strongly we feel about this.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Any other comments, questions? All right, y'all. Seeing none, we will be meeting next month, getting a fascinating update on sanitary sewer overflows, one of my favorite topics. Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. Are we holding this item in committee or are we reporting it out?
Excellent question. I believe we can report this out. Do we need a motion for that? I will take a motion to report this out. Mr. Cox.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to report this out to council with no action at this time.
And second by Councilmember Knight. All in favor? Any opposed? Excellent. Action passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks for keeping us on task. All right, y'all, I think that's it. So thank you so much, and meeting's adjourned.